like to welcome everyone on behalf of the University of Nebraska at Omaha to this symposium, the Vietnam War Lessons and Legacies. We'd like to acknowledge and thank those who have made this symposium possible, especially former Secretary of Defense and Senator Chuck Hagel for his support in crafting and planning this event, UNO Chancellor John Christensen, and the symposium's generous sponsors, Union Pacific, Peter Hewitt and Sons, and Gallup. This event was also made possible in part, too, by a grant from Humanities Nebraska. And as a reminder, please take a moment at the end, at least of this session, to fill out an evaluation. You also have some note cards, so please be willing to write some questions down for our panel today. Now, the title of our panel is The Fall of Saigon and Its Aftermath. Our panelists who are up here with me today is Dao Nguyen and Richard Armitage. I myself am your moderator, Kent Blancett. I happen to be an assistant professor of history as well as Native American studies here at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. This is of particular importance to me to be here trying to develop a course on Vietnam for UNO. So I'm learning a lot from everyone here, and I want to thank all the veterans in our audience today for your support and for defending our country as well. And also want to say welcome home. So let me introduce our panelists to you today. First, I'd like to introduce Dao Nguyen. He's a leader in the Vietnamese community in Lincoln, Nebraska. And he was a young man who was studying law before joining the Vietnamese Navy. And in 1969, he was sent to the U.S. for military training and returned to Vietnam and served in operation offices at the VN Naval Headquarters in Saigon until 1975. When Saigon fell, our other panelists beside me, Richard Armitage, had urged Dao to evacuate, which he did that night. He escaped to Guam on board a ship while he carried his wife as well as his 2 children. Richard Armitage had served 3 combat tours in Vietnam after he graduated in 1967 from the U.S. Naval Academy. He serves as president of Armitage International and is a former Deputy Secretary of State, serving from 2001 to 2005. Mr. Armitage has also served in a number of high-level diplomatic positions, including Special Emissary to Jordan's King Hussein during the 1991 Gulf War. And for 6 years, he served also in the Pentagon as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs and as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia and the Pacific Affairs. Armitage is also the recipient of numerous U.S. and foreign military decorations for his public service. So if you'll join me in giving them a round of applause. I think we'll first start with Dao Nguyen.
Just know in case I need it. My name is Dao Nguyen. Live in Lincoln right now. I would like to talk a little bit about my experience with the fall of Vietnam and aftermath. You know, during the final months of 1975, during the April, the communists from the North Vietnam attacked the South Vietnam in many fronts, all fronts, everywhere. At that time, the South Vietnam could not halt their advance because the Congress rejected the proposal of from President Nixon proposal to increase the military aid for South Vietnam. We had ammunition, we had weapons, we had almost everything for the war, for the fighting, but we did not have the ammunition, did not have a supply, no gas, nothing for, you know, in the operation we have to count every shot, every, you know, bullet we should we should. Then we on the April 30th, 1975, communists towards Saigon. The Vietnam War ended at that time. When the Saigon fell, there were much speculation about the possibility of a bloodbath, and but the North Vietnamese rulers hid very skillfully hid their anger, their desire for revenge and retaliation in such a way that no emotion can be detected on them and on the troops who are marching into Saigon. So people at that time think that, jump into conclusion that there would be no bloodbath. But I say it does. Three things. The first thing is re-education camp. The second thing is the new economic area. The third thing is the boat people. At the I think 1976, when the bamboo curtain came down, communists sent communist force order on the correspondent, on the reporter, United Nations, and Red Cross representative out of the country. Then they declare they will punish. They will send about 12 categories of people to face a trial by the People's Tribunal. Amongst those people are we call it Legacies, loyal to American military troops, and all the veterans like me with the residential regime and his people, his cabinet. And before they declared that, they announced that they already set up the re-education camp, and they set up the new economic area. About the economic area, they forced the people to sell their home, to go into some area, reclaim the land, and try to clean the jungle to plant something for food to survive, to be able to survive. At that time, I'm not in Vietnam, in the country. I did not have this kind of experience of a new economic area. But two French reporter, he described each new economic area like this. He said, each one is just a refabricated house and a place for one to come to it if there is no alternative. That would be the death. So, like people had no choice. Either you go to the new economic area or you die. And you don't have anything to eat because they don't supply the food for people in Vietnam at that time. That's the economic, new economic zone they define, and they force the people to come over there. Secondly, they put around 300,000 South Vietnamese people in re-education camp. They ill-treated them. Most of the people were killed. Most of the people were tortured, starvation, and a lot of bad things. Some people were liquidated secretly. Some people were killed by the thing they call, like stage accident, like forcing them to deactivate the minefields with the bare hands. You know, a lot of people were killed that way. And with the um, both people, beside the victims of those two, those two things I just mentioned, re-education camp and a new economic area, about 2 million, I think around 2 million people escaped the regime, escaped the country secretly. And I think half of them had lost their lives in the ocean. They were killed by storm, killed by pirates, killed by a lot of things. And that's really bad. That's really bad. So look at those three things. I can jump into conclusion that that's another form of bloodbath. You know, they kill gradually. But before they kill, they the reason why they try to hide it at first because they don't want any intervention from. They try to hide the bloodbath, the intention of performing carry out the bloodbath, to prevent the intervention from Western country, and especially they try to win the USA in the form of paying for the war damage, something like that. So I can conclude that the bloodbath really exists after the fall of Saigon. Many other things, like corruption and economic, down, and human rights, I don't want to mention it because we don't have time limit for that. Now I would like to tell you how I get out of the country and how I settled my life in Lincoln, Nebraska. Well, I left the country on 29 April after seeing Richard Armitage. He worked with me in that Navy headquarters. He already retired from military, from Navy at that time, right? I call him Daifu. Daifu means Captain, Lieutenant Rich. Maybe he was rich at that time. And then I met him. He told me, now, too late. So you better get home and get your family out of the country as soon as possible. And he handed me a bullet-free jacket. Black jacket, yeah. Why did you do that? I can't remember that, but I didn't forget to ask you. We had a reunion last night at on the dinner. I did. I went home and took my family, small family, immediate family, to the headquarters and tried to get on the ship. But unfortunately, my ship went aground. After navigating for 1 hour, it went aground. So we have to, we give some signal for the rescue ship come over, but many ships pass by and never stop. So I decided to, finally one rescue ship came over, and they throw some ropes over to my ship. And we hurried to walk the rope. The two ships side by side. The distance around 5 or 6 or 10 feet, and with few ropes on it, and it's rocking because of water. Very dangerous, but we had no choice. I have to walk. Unfortunately, in the morning of that day, my wife accidentally spilled burning oil on her foot, so she could not walk normally, cannot keep balance. Then I have to decide to carry her on my back, and my 6-year-old daughter on her back, and my 3-year-old son on my daughter's back, and try to stand up, risk my life to walk her rope. Somehow, I managed the walk safely to another rescue ship. But as I reached the deck of the rescue ship, I fall to sleep. maybe because the fear so strong that I fell to sleep until I heard the sound of the ocean. So I woke up. And next day we sailed to Philippines, and from Philippines we changed to another merchant ship and continue the journey to Guam. And at Guam, Iceland, I worked voluntarily as a translator, interpreter, then a camp leader to help Vietnamese people over there. Um, Finally, I was transferred by September. Around the end of August, I will sent to the Fort Chaffee camp, another refugee camp in Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. And from there, I I only wait for 2 weeks to have a sponsor, and finally, I was get out of the camp to settle my life in Milford, about 20 miles from Lincoln. People usually ask me why I picked Lincoln, Peace, Nebraska. Well, besides some other reason, I just told them, look at the map, I see the Nebraska in the middle of the America. So it means neither too cold nor too hot. So I picked Nebraska. I think that's a good place to live. That's the only reason only one an additional reason, two other reason. And I started my first job at a teller. Wow, it might be easy for you, but not for me, because in Vietnam, all the transaction handled by cash. So I have to stand up and teach the people how to, purchase the money order or cash a check. It's horrible. But I managed to climb the ladder and take some classes from university. At first for banking, business. Then one day, when I transferred down to the book department, I found out one thing. I discovered one very important thing. Computer and me and I understand each other better than human being. So that discovery led me to a programming job at the National Bank of Commerce. Then led me to the bachelor degree and master degree in computer science. But by the time I worked on my PhD degree, after a year, I was interrupted to go back to Vietnam for a few times to rescue my brother, who was just relieved from the education camp and very sick. I successfully brought him over to the United States, and he managed to live for a few years and passed away after that. Well, in conclusion for my speech before Richard Armitage take over, I am grateful to America, very grateful. I found people in Nebraska very nice and very friendly. And many people helped me directly or indirectly to start my life easily. I had a good life. That's why after retirement, I tried to pay back by, working for about 10 years to help Vietnamese people without any job, volunteer, and help them on immigration, on every issue, and also help American people too in marriage with the Vietnamese people in Vietnam. One thing I find a lesson America already learned that getting out of the world might be more complicated than getting into conflict. I hope that through our speech today, you can get some kind of lesson for yourself. For example, we have to risk our life for freedom, and you have freedom for granted. So I recommend the younger generation, to value it, to share it, and to become a good citizen for United States and all the people in the world. And even the Vietnam War already passed for a long time, but it's still very vivid in my memory anytime I think about that. Worry about destruction, nothing called construction. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, Dowie Dow. It's nice to be with you again after, 40 years? Dr. Blandstedt, thank you very much for moderating this. I'm going to try to make this somewhat interesting for all of you by just doing a narrative of the last 4 or 5 days of Saigon. And it starts with me lounging in my house in San Diego after I've left the Defense Attaché office and received a call from the Pentagon. Secretary Schlesinger had asked me to return to Vietnam to effect the destruction or the elimination of the capital equipment that we were leaving behind. He didn't want the North Vietnamese to have it. So I arrived back in Saigon on the 24th of April on the last Pan Am flight. Went down to Navy headquarters where I immediately started liaison with Lieutenant Dow's boss, a Navy captain by the name of Do Kim. And it took me a couple of days to get my feet on the ground and to figure out what the situation was. At night, we were being rocketed by 122 millimeter rockets. But the situation in the city seemed tense but calm with no fighting. However, that all changed on the 27th. I was asked to accompany a Vietnamese Commodore to a base on the Saigon River, which was under attack by the North Vietnamese. And I was astonished at the bravery of the South Vietnamese sailors. They were basically surrounded, water on one side, thousands of refugees on another, and North Vietnamese coming at them wave after wave. And that's when I realized that this game was up. On the 28th, I was asked to go to Bien Hoa Air Base, which some of you would probably know. But this Bien Hoa, you would not know. There wasn't a sound. There was nothing. It was completely empty. And I was supposed to destroy precision measurement instruments. While I was in the process of doing that, the North Vietnamese overran the base, and a CIA proprietary aircraft was the only aircraft that could come in and get me and a few stragglers, ARVN stragglers, who showed up as they saw an American working in one corner of the base. Came back to Saigon, immediately went down to Vietnamese Navy headquarters to inform Captain Kim that I didn't know when the evacuation would happen, but it was going to happen. And I needed to make sure all the Vietnamese Navy ships did not fall into North Vietnamese hands. He looked at me and said, well, you want to sail them out? And yes, he said, well, you know what that means. Our sailors won't leave without their families, and I knew what it meant. He and I were the only two who knew what was going on because, in fact, we were planning a traitorous act. The government of Saigon had not fallen, and we were going to deny one of the major military instruments they had. Most of the capital ships and a lot of the rivercraft were at the Saigon River Pier because the North Vietnamese onslaught had moved down the coast to right outside of Saigon. So on the 29th, as I woke up, I stayed at Navy headquarters all those nights, went outside, you may remember this, what I call a 9/11 day now, beautiful blue sky, actually, on the 29th. But looked up and I saw a Vietnamese 130 aircraft which had been hit by a rocket, and it was slowly circling down, smoking, and it was going to crash somewhere in Saigon. I immediately drove to the Defense Attaché office to find out what the situation was, went back and forth during that day 4 or 5 times. Finally told Captain Kim, there's no official word, but I think we're going tonight. And so I will meet you at Con Son Island. The U.S. government knew nothing about 31,000 refugees, nothing. The orders were given to destroy the equipment or to eliminate the ability of the North Vietnamese to have the equipment. So I went to DAO, flew out on a Marine helicopter around 9:30 or 10 at night, landed on the USS Blue Ridge. No wallet, no Naval Academy ring, no passport, just a .45. And I looked as I got off on the deck. I saw a Navy lieutenant who had the epaulette indicating that he was an aide. I happen to know that the admiral in charge was a fellow by the name of Whitmire. You can look him up. He's a very interesting naval character. I said to the lieutenant, you're the aide to the admiral. I need to see the admiral. You're not going to believe this, but I dressed under the admiral's picture every day for 3 years. Admiral Don Whitmire had been a Naval Academy football player at Navy, and his picture hung proudly in the place where I was changing. I was a terrible football player. I just tried hard, but I did change under his picture. The lieutenant was a pretty alert guy, and he went up and saw the admiral, and the admiral was kind of, I think, amused. I'm not sure. But he asked me to come up. I came up to his stateroom, and he asked me my story, and I said that I was on a mission from Secretary Schlesinger, which made him raise his eyebrows a bit. I said, if you please send a flash message back to the Pentagon, they will respond. In those days, a flash message took 20 minutes. Now it's a flash. Admiral Whitmire did it. Secretary Schlesinger acknowledged it and said I was who I said I was. I was on a mission for him, and told the admiral the following: do what he says, which is pretty heady stuff for an ex-Navy lieutenant. So I said I have to go to Con Son Island, which is where I had arranged to meet the Vietnamese fleet. I believe there'll be 30-some ships down there and all these people. So he sent me over, the admiral in his boat, to another fast frigate, the USS Kirk, FF 1087. And I went aboard to meet a very skeptical Commodore and captain, whose quote to me was, young man, I was a much younger man then, said, young man, I'm not used to having strange armed civilians come aboard my ship in the middle of the night. I said, Commodore, I'm not used to coming aboard ships armed in the middle of the night, but please steam to Con Son Island. And he did it, and as dawn broke, there were 30-some ships, 31,000 people, and we set sail for the Philippines, and 7 or 8 days later, arrived in the Philippines. And to cap the story off, the Philippines were afraid of the North Vietnamese onslaught. They wouldn't allow the Vietnamese Navy ships to enter into Subic Bay. So they had to be reflagged in a very emotional ceremony. Each of the ships took down the South Vietnamese flag, put up an American flag, transferred the thousands and thousands of people to MSTS ships, and they went to Guam originally. I was finally allowed into Subic Bay, but put under loose house arrest by President Marcos, who was nervous about this juggernaut from North Vietnam. This house arrest was actually quite pleasant. There were 2 Navy Chief Petty Officers who used to work for me there, and so it consisted of 3 days in Subic drinking all the beer I could stand. And that's the last days of Saigon. The one thing I will say, there's a lot of urban myth, there's a lot of legend about what went on. From my point of view, and I served with the Vietnamese Navy and Marine Corps for 6 years, I was never disappointed. These guys could fight and did fight. And what I saw in the last days, even when there was no question of the fall of the country, and certainly the fall of Saigon, I saw some units and certainly many individuals who were fighting like crazy. So I just want to leave you that, because there's an urban myth that the whole thing just blew apart. It is not so. So thank you.
In preparation for this panel, I began thinking a lot about our contemporary issues, especially thinking about Syria and the refugee crisis. What are some of the lessons that you would have in the sense of what would be the present-day crisis in Syria for what you experienced with the fall of Saigon?
Well, Syria, and you might extend it, I think, to Iraq and Afghanistan. The lessons, I think, are several. First of all, as I've said, in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, most of the Middle East, it's not that the people there aren't capable of fighting. They certainly are. And it's not that they're not capable of being rearmed and retrained. They certainly are in all those cases. But the same thing that Lieutenant Dow and I lacked in Vietnam was lacking in all these other places, and that is you can have soldiers that are as brave and as hardy as you'd ever want, men and women. But if they don't have a guiding spirit and a government worth sacrificing for, all the training and all the arming will still lead to failure. We didn't fail in Vietnam because of the lack of courage of U.S. forces. We didn't fail in Vietnam, in my view, a lack of courage of Vietnamese forces. We failed because we had governments that weren't worthy of the sacrifice of people like Lieutenant Dow and his family. That's a lesson learned.
We have a question from the audience for Dow Nguyen. What are younger generations in the Vietnamese community currently being taught about Vietnam as well as the war itself?
Younger generation, Lincoln, thought, I don't think they really understand the Vietnam War very well. I had some occasion to talk to them about that in the, some not a celebration, but some event on the fall Vietnam. Every year we had one event to memorize what happened on the last day we lost the country. And I had a chance to talk about the Vietnam War, a chance to talk about the war, the aftermath, the effect of that. And very difficult for me to get them to really understand and how their parents left the country, because when they come over here, it looked like they will get into a conflict of two different cultures, Vietnamese and American culture. And some people adapted, some people, just lean on one side. So that's why sometimes the parents try to explain to them about Vietnam War, but they did not really understand that because they did not realize what war is. But with the younger generation come at the time like 1975, yes, they did remember Vietnam War, like people around 40 to 50 years old, by the time 1975, they live in the time of the Vietnam War. So they really understand Vietnam War and they appreciated the time, the occasion, opportunity they live in the United States, free of war. They learn a lot of lessons. The one lesson I already emphasized with the younger generation, in general, I also, they learn the lesson to value, and cherish the freedom they have. So they continue to study, and most of people graduate from university. Even we had some lawyers, like in Omaha, we had a lawyer, Chandler, and we had some doctor, because they learned the lesson very well, so they try to be the good people to serve the country.
One other question I think is very poignant to talking about the fall of Saigon, which is those who were left behind. And there was a question from the audience as to if some of our soldiers and servicemen had also been left behind in the fall of Saigon, and how we address those who are missing in action after this war.
Well, it is a topical question. I can give you the short answer, and I can give you a more heartfelt answer. The short answer is the Department of Defense and Secretary Hagel particularly established a very strong and powerful office for missing persons and POW MIA, and beefed it up mightily because his view, if I can put words in his mouth, is this was a debt we owed servicemen. It was a down payment for future servicemen, that they would know that their government would exert efforts to find out what happened to them, should something happen to them. And finally, it was a duty. We have a duty as officials in the Department of Defense or serving members of the military to do this, a duty to the servicemen and a duty to the families. The more heartfelt answer is I, at one time, was in charge of POW MIA when it was a much smaller office. And we approached it. I went to Vietnam 3 times on this issue. We approached the Vietnamese on it. We knew, for instance, that the North Vietnamese had stored 400 bodies. We knew this from testimony of a mortician from North Vietnam who had gotten out. And we worked with the Vietnamese, and over time, all of those bodies have been returned. And how do I know? Because the chemicals that they were treated with to preserve the bones indicated that they had been preserved. So your government, in my view, is exerting efforts, but there's so much distrust of government generally, and Washington specifically, that even these efforts can't often find an ear to have the telling.
Another question I think is poignant and related to our last question. The audience would like to know if there is an organization or agency possibly devoted to reuniting families who are split and or separated by the war after the fall of Saigon.
United Vietnamese family from Saigon and America. Yeah, we do. We do have some program to allow the people already in the United States sponsor their immediate member of family, like mother, father, husband, wife, and children, even brother and sister. Yes, we do. That's program run by the immigration. Like USCIS, right? Yeah, Homeland Department. We do have that. But besides that, we also had a program to sponsor the people over to the United States for traveling, for visiting, temporarily staying here for 3 months. And yeah, I think is that a question, the answer question correctly? It's just run by government, not run by us at all. We had no authority to do that. In order to qualify to come to the United States, you have to be a relative, immediate relative to the people who already live in the United States, either U.S. citizen or permanent resident. Like, for example, I am a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. I can sponsor my wife or my children under 21 years old immediately, or my parent. But if I sponsor my children over 21 years old, I'm ready to marry, we have to wait about 6 or 7 years. Thank you.
Just ask Dr. Lancett's permission to amend, or as they'd say in the Senate, to extend and advise, or revise and extend my remarks. You asked a question about lessons we might have learned from Syria and others, and I gave an answer. But I think there are two other lessons that I wish I'd have said when you'd asked the question. And the first is, I know that you don't want to precipitate the fall of a country in which we're working. But there is an implied, I think, agreement that you should help those who help us. And I'm translators, things of this nature, who, in the Middle East, for instance, will be at risk. And we don't seem to have learned that lesson. We're doing it in a piecemeal fashion in Afghanistan, but not nowhere near as is needed. The second lesson, and this is not a political statement at this time in our presidential election, it is a practical one, that we have to learn not to take counsel of our fears. Lieutenant Dow said he went to Fort Chaffee. I was open at Fort Chaffee and Fort Indian Tower Gap. Camp Pendleton was already opened. And at that time, if you go back and look in the newspapers, there was some of the fear about this great influx of refugees and what's it going to do to our society and how do we handle it and all of this, not unlike some of the rhetoric we hear in Washington and around the country about a fear of immigration. And what happened? Well, NGOs stepped up, different religious organizations stepped up, and slowly the camps were drained of people. They got sponsors, et cetera. And about the mid-'90s, if you were to go to a high school graduation, who's a valedictorian? Who's the salutatorian? It is a Vietnamese name. It's about the same time you had a great athlete for the Dallas Cowboys named Dat Nguyen, who was a linebacker for the Cowboys. So what was greeted with some fear here by many of our citizens at the time turned out to be a great boost to our national DNA. So we shouldn't take counsel of our fears, and that's another lesson I think we should learn.
Can I, can I add one more? Well, back to the lesson we learned. I already mentioned about the getting out of the war, more conflict than getting to the more complicated than getting into the conflict. But I still see America still make that mistake after Vietnam War, still continue on the Iraq, Afghanistan. That's the way I see. Not exactly the way it's supposed to happen. Um, about the question related to the younger generation, how they understand the Vietnam War. I think I look around for my daughter who attend the UNO, my youngest one. Are you around here? Oh yeah, she's there. Yeah, if you I asked her to stay in UNO. I did, but he said no. She like you know. Ask her about how she understands the Vietnam War. Maybe a little, right? Very difficult to talk about that. Sometimes during the dinner or some occasion, we talk a little bit about how we suffer, during the war, how many people suffer during the war, but very difficult for the younger generation to understand it. I think Omaha had a program to try to explain more about the Vietnam War. For example, hopefully one day students can learn more, can see how ugly or how nasty about the war, and so we can live better in harmony, in peace. And also immigration, like by the time I came to Fort Chaffee, not easily, like people stand on the road and throw in lots of tomato, whatever, like egg to us because they're afraid that immigrants will come over here and take away their job. We like when we get over to the sea, with the ocean, we didn't know where to go and we didn't know what to do because we just fight the war and many. I intend to ask Richard, take some time, like many occasions we can win the war easily. For example, I work on the operation thing about Hong Kong in the North Vietnam. We're ready to capture that. We're ready to win the war, but we have no, stop, don't do it. Because of this, because of that, more politician and more media involved, so as a result, South Vietnam lost the country, and South Vietnam was considered as the loser of the world, including America too, right? America, yeah. Yeah, that's all I need to add into. Thank you.
I think I have one more final question, and I was curious to know a little bit more about your reunion after not seeing each other for 40 years. What was that experience like for you both?
Well, we very happy. At first, we were trying to hide my name tag and his name tag to see if we can recognize each other. Yeah, we did. We did right away, and we remind, thing has been on the last day we said we saw each other 41 years ago on the 29th April. I met him very, very often during the war. Went to his apartment, his home for party, drinking, David Fu, with rich captain, So we really had a good time with him. I really had a good time with him during the Vietnam War. But looking back about the people still behind and people affected by the, very with the bad situation right now, like veteran and like people who handicapped people, I can't remember that word, but they were ill-treated by the Vietnam government right now. So we did own effort to try to get some money to send to Vietnam every year to help veterans, to help other people um, who still stay in Vietnam. We don't have the MIA like America has, but we do have a lot of situation in really bad and need the help from the world. Hopefully, in the future, younger generation like my daughter will have some voluntary mission to come back to Vietnam to serve, to help other people, not only Vietnam, other country too, because we have to the Vietnam world, all the world, we should learn a lesson. Destruction is a word. War is destruction. So, and when we have really had a freedom, we need to value it, we need to embrace it, we need to cherish it, so we can enjoy the life. If we don't enjoy life, we cannot help other people. So enjoy life, enjoy school, enjoy education, enjoy job, everything, And yeah, I think that in short, we really had a good time last night. Did you have a drink? I had a good wine. And very good yeah, we had a good time. We recognized each other right away. And we remind about the black jacket he handed over to me. Why you handed it to me? You're afraid I might be killed? I may be shot when I get home? Oh.
I used to see you every day at Navy headquarters at one time. And when I met Lieutenant Dallas, I recognized him right away, greeted him in Vietnamese, and he said to me, "Well, you haven't changed a bit." And I responded, "When you're fat and bald, you never change."
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That good.
Well, I think that's a perfect note for us to end on today. Thank you very, very much for being with us today and sharing in these experiences. Thank you. And one more applause for our participants.